My name is Regina Chu, and I'm one of the judges on the Hennepin County District Court bench. As you know, this is a criminal case in which the state of Minnesota has charged the defendant, Kimberly Potter, with the following charges. Count 1 is first-degree manslaughter predicated on reckless use or handling of a firearm, and that charge alleges that on or about April 11, 2021 in Brooklyn Center, Hennepin County, Minnesota, defendant Kimberly Ann Potter caused the death of Dante Demetrius Wright while committing the misdemeanor offense of reckless handling or use of a firearm so as to endanger the safety of another with such force and violence that death or great bodily harm to any person was reasonably foreseeable. Count 2 is for second-degree manslaughter, and that count alleges that on or about April 11, 2021 in Brooklyn Center, Hennepin County, Minnesota, defendant Kimberly Ann Potter caused the death of Dante Demetrius Wright by her culpable negligence, whereby Kimberly Potter created an unreasonable risk and consciously took a chance of causing death or great bodily harm to Dante Demetrius Wright while using or possessing a firearm. The defendant has pleaded not guilty. This plea denies the charges and places upon the state the burden of proving defendant's guilt beyond a reasonable doubt. The state is represented by AG Mr. Keith Ellison, Mr. Matt Frank, Ms. Erin Eldridge, and Mr. Josh Larson. The defendant is represented by Mr. Earl Gray and Mr. Paul Eng. And will the defendant please stand up? Thank you. I want to introduce to you a couple of other people that will play critical roles. Oh, I am sorry. Is it Ann Montgomery?
Amanda.
Okay, Amanda. I apologize. Thank you. All right, I'd like to introduce you to a couple of other people that will play critical roles in this trial. My staff includes Mr. Zach Kramer, he's my law clerk, and Ms. Jessica Bauer, my judicial clerk. Ms. Bauer and Mr. Kramer are responsible for all administrative matters. If you need to get a message to me of a personal nature, please let my staff know, and they'll make sure that I find out. Okay? Seated in front of me is Carly Davis. She's a certified court reporter, and she's responsible for taking down all testimony and keeping a formal record of the trial. This means that when you respond to questions, you must speak loudly and clearly so our court reporter can make an accurate record of these proceedings. If your answer is a yes or a no, you must give your answer orally so that the court reporter can put the answer down instead of shaking your head. And please refrain from saying uh-huh or because that doesn't make a clear record. Okay? While we get started here, there are a couple of logistics I'd like to address. Please wear your mask at all times during, while in the courtroom and while in the courthouse. I'm going to tell you about, we're going to start out with voir dire, which is basically jury selection. And jury selection is going to have two parts. It'll be a group part and an individual part. In the group part, I'll have all of you here and I'll ask you some questions. I will ask you to raise your hand. You don't have to answer orally, just raise your hand. Then each of you will be asked to leave the courtroom and will question each panel member individually. When that happens, I'll ask you to take a seat in the witness box, and I'll do follow-up questions on your questionnaire. After that, the attorneys will have an opportunity to ask you questions as well. So that basically is the outline of voir dire. Okay? Please note that we're not able to always control the temperature in the courtroom, so it is a good idea to dress in layers in case it's chilly in some parts of the courtroom, and it may be too warm in others, so I apologize for that. Throughout these proceedings, we're going to take breaks or recesses. Also, there may be other delays. I want to apologize in advance for any delays that might take place. I try to deal with all legal issues before court starts or after you leave for the day. But in every criminal trial, there are unanticipated delays that just couldn't be thought out before. So please understand that when these delays come up, I would suggest that you bring something to read. I'm going to try to keep the delays as short as possible, and I'll have my clerks let you know how long the delay is anticipated to be. All right? I'm going to give you some preliminary instructions. There are rules of law that apply in a criminal case. In the questioning that will take place, you may be asked whether you will accept and follow the rules of law that I give you, and you should have these instructions in mind when you answer these questions. A complaint is not evidence. It creates no inference or presumption of guilt. No member of the jury should in any way be prejudiced against the defendant because a complaint has been filed against her or because the defendant is on trial. The defendant is presumed innocent. In order for you to find the defendant guilty, the state must prove guilt. The defendant does not have to prove her innocence. The presumption of innocence remains with the defendant unless and until the defendant has been proven guilty beyond a reasonable doubt by evidence admitted in this trial. A common misperception of the American justice system is that the jury determines whether the accused person is guilty or innocent. That is not what American juries do in a criminal case. There is no such thing as an innocent verdict in American criminal law. The jury's verdict is either guilty or not guilty. Guilty means proved beyond a reasonable doubt. Not guilty means not proved beyond a reasonable doubt. To ensure that both the state and the defendant receive a fair trial by an impartial jury, it'll be necessary for me and the attorneys to ask you some questions. Remember that you will be under oath when you answer our questions and that you must answer truthfully. The questioning, is a very important part of this process. All of us hold personal opinions, and all of us have had things happen to us. The purpose of jury selection is to try to determine whether you hold certain opinions so strongly, or if something has happened to you or someone near and dear to you that would make it impossible for you to be an impartial juror in this type of a case. In other words, those opinions or those experiences would prevent you from listening to the evidence and making your decision solely on the evidence in this case. Please don't take any offense to any of the questions that will be asked. None of us wishes to pry into your personal lives. Our sole purpose and our obligation is to ensure that the jurors who decide this case are neutral, open-minded, and fair. Neutral means that before you hear all the evidence, you are not leaning one way or the other on the question of whether the state has proved guilt beyond a reasonable doubt. Open-minded means that you're willing to listen and consider all the evidence. Fair means that you will base your verdict on the evidence in the case and not on anything that is not presented in the case. We want you, of course, to bring your common sense into the jury room, but your verdict must be based on the evidence you hear during the trial. Your obligation is to honestly answer the questions and tell us of anything, even if you are not directly asked, that might affect your ability to be neutral, open-minded, and fair. Some of you who will be questioned will be excused from serving on the jury. If you are excused, it does not necessarily mean that anyone doubts that you're a fair person. I hope that you won't take any offense and understand if you are excused from this jury. At this point, members of the panel, I would ask that all of you please rise, raise your right hand, and face the clerk, who will swear you all under oath so that the answers to your questions will be given under oath. So please stand up and raise your right hand.
Do you affirm, under penalty of perjury, that you will truthfully answer all questions about your qualifications to serve as a juror? If so, please say, "I do."
Okay, please be seated. Thank you. All right. Now I'm going to ask the group a number of questions. Remember that no verbal response is necessary. I just want you to raise your hand. All right? Okay. Do any of you have serious concerns about your health if you were to serve as a juror in this case? Please raise your hand. Okay, no hands are raised. Our system of law presumes the defendant innocent of the charges against her unless and until she has been proven guilty beyond a reasonable doubt. The burden of the proof is on the state. The defendant does not have to prove her innocence, and she is presumed innocent. Do you accept the principle that the defendant is presumed innocent and that the state has a burden of proof? If so, please raise your hand. All hands are raised. Does anyone disagree with that principle? Please raise your hand. No hands are raised. If you serve as a juror, I'll instruct you as to the law. You must follow the law as I give it to you, even if you believe the law is or should be different. If you are willing to do this, please raise your hand. All right, all hands are raised. If you're chosen as a juror, I'll instruct you that proof beyond a reasonable doubt is such proof as ordinarily prudent men and women would act upon in their most important affairs. A reasonable doubt is a doubt based upon reason and common sense. Proof beyond a reasonable doubt does not mean proof beyond all possibility of doubt. Does anyone disagree with this principle of law? If so, please raise your hand. All right, no hands are raised. In arriving at your verdict, if you sit as a juror, the subject of penalty or punishment is not to be discussed or considered by you. This is a matter that lies solely with the court and within the limits prescribed by law. The subject of penalty or punishment must not in any way affect your decision as to whether or not the state has proven the charges beyond a reasonable doubt. Are you willing to follow this instruction? If so, please raise your hand. All hands are raised. Under our system of justice, the jury must decide the case solely on the evidence produced in court and the law that the judge instructs, and not because of bias, passion, prejudice, or sympathy. Would you be able to follow this principle of law? If so, please raise your hand. All hands are raised. There will be police officers who will testify in this case, as well as other witnesses. I'm going to give you some guidelines in determining whether a witness is believable or not believable. It's basically a matter of common sense, but things to look at are: how did the witness appear? Did he or she seem honest and sincere? Will the witness gain or lose if the case is decided a certain way? Was the witness's testimony consistent with other evidence in the case? What is the witness's relationship to the parties? Would you be able to use these guidelines in deciding the credibility of a police officer just as you would any other witness? If so, please raise your hand. All hands are raised. Is there anyone here who would believe the testimony of a police officer just because he or she is in law enforcement? No hands are raised. Is there anyone here who would totally discount the testimony of a police officer just because of his or her position? No hands are raised. Okay. All right. One thing I want to say, members of the panel, is I want to thank you. I want to thank you so much for responding to your jury summonses. By showing up today and proving your willingness to serve, you are our heroes. Our criminal justice system could not work without good citizens like you. Not all of us can serve in the military, but what we can do is do our civic duty and serve as jurors. And I know these are difficult times, but doing our duty in difficult times is the American way. A heartfelt thanks to all of you for appearing today. All right. You were given a list of possible witnesses earlier. They may not all testify. Do any of you know any of the witnesses on the list? I want you to raise your hand even if you're not sure. Okay, no hands are raised. Do any of you have any trouble hearing or understanding what I am saying? Please raise your hand. No hands are raised. Okay, we will start with opening statements after the jury is selected. We'll start with opening statements by December 8th, and we expect to be finished by no later than Christmas Eve. That is our best estimate. Don't be concerned if we don't finish by Christmas Eve. I intend to take Christmas Eve and that weekend off and start again on December 27 if we are not done. So I wanted to give you that so you wouldn't be concerned that you would miss Christmas and Christmas Eve with your families. Typically, the trial will be conducted from 9 to 4:30, going as late as 5 o'clock. There'll be a 20-minute break in the morning at approximately 10:30 and a 20-minute break in the afternoon. We'll take lunch from 12:30 to 1:30. Please remember, while court is in recess, that you're not to talk to anyone involved in this case, nor should you discuss the case among yourselves. During the recess, you may see the attorneys or parties in the hallways. Don't take offense if they don't stop to say hello or talk to you. Everyone involved in this case has been ordered to have no contact or communication with any member of the jury panel. Any violation of that rule could jeopardize the trial, and this prohibition will continue until a verdict is rendered. Okay, at this point, members of the panel, I'm going to excuse everyone except for panel member number 2. So please follow the deputy to your waiting area.